Hi, I'm Susan Swain, host of C-SPAN's Q&A, where we spend an hour with nonfiction writers and historians who add context to today's news. Adam Smith, a longtime Democratic congressman from Washington state, has served in public office since his first campaign for state senate at age 25. For much of that time, he has struggled with bouts of anxiety and depression, later coupled with debilitating chronic pain. He captures it all in his new book, Lost and Broken, and joins us this week to discuss his efforts to find the right treatments, estimating that he's seen more than 100 healthcare professionals, all while navigating his busy congressional schedule. We also discuss his observations about the U.S. healthcare system and his thoughts about the need for more social acceptance of Americans with physical and mental health issues. Our conversation will begin in just a moment. U.S. Representative Adam Smith, you have a new book that's coming out with a pretty stark, I would say, title, Lost and Broken.
Yeah, well, I like the subtitle, My Journey Back from Chronic Pain, Crippling Anxiety. The basic title isn't the most optimistic in the world, but there is a path back. So, yes. What is
the story you tell in the book?
Well, basically, I went through a bout of anxiety and chronic pain. And the only struggle to explain it is there were lifelong aspects of it. I mean, this is stuff that I was feeling, when I was a kid. High stress, I had anxiety then, and I actually had a knee injury when I was 12 years old that manifested itself out. But I dealt with it without, any significant problems until I was 40, when I had an uncontrollable bout of anxiety that lasted about 5 months. And then about 8 years after that, the anxiety came back, and I couldn't find a way out of it. And then shortly thereafter, chronic pain set in. I had 3 hip surgeries, and that whole thing lasted about 6 years of struggling to sort of figure out what's wrong with me and what do I do about it. It was a very difficult 6-year period.
Why did you decide you wanted to write about it?
Well, originally I decided to want to write about it because I wanted to sort of capture what happened. So I was coming out of it, mid-2019. Was when I finally started to feel better, close to where I was at. Well, I guess, I finally got off all the medications I was taking in April of 2019. That was the last time. And then the physical therapy and the psychotherapy had been kicking in. And I was like, so what happened? It's fresh in my mind. I want to write it down. Then the pandemic hit. So I had a lot of time. So I wrote it just to sort of keep it fresh in my mind and to remember what happened. And then as I was writing it and as I was thinking about other people, tens of millions of people suffer from some combination of anxiety, depression, or chronic pain. And I thought it would be a story that would be helpful in the larger debate about how do we address those challenges that so many people face.
Over the course of a couple decades, really, in different periods, you saw, you say, an estimated 100 healthcare professionals. Yeah. 100, that's a lot.
Yeah, it's more than north of 100, actually, but yes.
What does that say about our healthcare system?
Yeah, it says that the answers aren't as easy to find as they should be. Now, a lot of that, I think on the mental health side, it was probably only about 10 or 12 therapists, psychiatrists, psychologists that I saw. The bulk of that number comes from physical therapists. Comes from physical therapists, massage therapists, osteopathic surgeons, chronic pain specialists, personal trainers, an acupuncturist, a couple of podiatrists. Basically, desperate effort to figure out what's going on here. And I think one of the biggest things it says is healthcare is very specialized. You don't really have that person who goes, okay, let's look at the whole body and mind and get the diagnosis right first. It's very fragmented, and the whole thing is connected. That's almost a cliche at this point. But just because your foot hurts, it may not have anything directly to do with your foot. It may be connected to something else in your body. Anxiety and depression can also lead to chronic pain. It is all connected, and finding those connections is very difficult.
Well, you're in a situation where you can have an impact on healthcare policy. Absolutely. Is there anything you would change as a result of your experience?
Well, the number one biggest thing is universal access to healthcare. Now, that does not solve the whole problem, but there are too many people out there who don't have insurance. So, you will struggle to find a solution. Now, I will say that of those 100 plus, probably over half of them didn't take insurance. Okay, so that's part of the problem as well. But certainly universal access to health care. Second big thing is let's emphasize primary care, that the doctors who are supposed to look at you holistically. And the third thing is we are way too reliant on drugs and surgeries. That is sort of the easy button in healthcare. It's expensive and it oftentimes makes the problem worse.
One of the things I'd like to have you explain, because over the years, callers to C-SPAN's call-in program always ask questions about members of Congress health insurance.
Yeah.
So how does your system work compared to what people might find in the market?
Yeah, well, it's very similar. In fact, federal employees we got a solid healthcare system, but it's not the best. And then also, because of the Affordable Care Act and because of a weird little thing, all members of Congress are forced to buy on I forget what they call it now, the Affordable Care Act plan. We got bumped off of FEBHP, which is what all federal employees do, and we had to buy in I can't remember what they call it, passed the thing, it was a while ago now, but anyway, the marketplace. So, I forget what my premiums are per month, but it's like, $500-$600, it's pretty significant. We have co-pays, and also we have networks, and you may not be in the network. My wife actually works for King County. She has much better health insurance than I do. So she is on that health care plan, and our children are with her on that, and then I'm on mine, complicated reasons. So it's complicated and difficult, but there were a lot of particularly psychiatrists and psychologists who weren't covered by my insurance plan.
So Capitol Hill is a pretty small town. What are you anticipating as your story becomes more widely known?
That's hard to say. I haven't really thought about that. I don't think much will change. I mean, fortunately, at this point, I've been here 27 years. I was the chairman of the Armed Services Committee for the last 4 years, so people know me. And this is not, I think, going to be that shocking. I'm open and honest about what's going on with me for the most part. But I don't know. I'll be interested to see.
When you wrote the book, did you find it difficult to go through? Was it cathartic? How was the experience like?
No, it was cathartic. I didn't find it difficult at all. I think the biggest thing about it for me is I'm an excessively logical person. I love to be able to explain things. Like even now, I'm going to have a budget town hall in a couple of weeks to talk about the deficit. And I'm fascinated to sort of walk through, here's the deficit, here's the debt ceiling, here's what's really going on. So for me, this was like explaining it. So what happened? Okay, how did I wind up in this place in the first place? And then how did I work my way out of it, and what were the lessons that were learned? So it was like, well, not really solving a puzzle, because at that point the puzzle had been solved. It was understanding how I solved the puzzle. And I found that fascinating.
So I'm going to work through some of the stories that you tell in the book, beginning with your origin story.
Right.
Where were you raised?
Well, the origin story actually starts with I was adopted. So I was actually born at George Washington University Hospital. My biological mother was in the Foreign Service at the time. She was a code clerk. Odd to say. I was conceived in Prague, but they were not married, and my biological father didn't want to have anything to do with it. So my biological mother gave me up for adoption to her older brother, who was living in SeaTac and working for United Airlines at the time. So I was born, George Washington University Hospital, 10 days later, flown to SeaTac, and that's where I grew up. But I did not know that I was adopted. Nobody ever told me until after both my parents had passed away, and my biological mother, who I had grown up thinking was my aunt, sent me a letter explaining it to me.
Were you able to resolve issues with her? She was, at that point, you're both grown-ups and quite a story to tell. So did you have a big conversation?
We had a decent relationship before that, and we still do. She's still alive, actually. We talk regularly, and I don't know if I'd go so far as to say resolve the issues, but we certainly had conversations throughout the years and talked about it.
There's a sad note to the story. She really, it's as you wrote it, didn't have much choice about giving you up at the time.
Yeah, no, it's a weird thing. And this is, it's funny. People think the world we live in today and all the conflicts we have, but the depth of the sexism in America is really not fully understood, because up until probably the mid-70s, the expectation was if you were a woman and you got married, you didn't need a job. Okay. In fact, if you had a job, you were taking it from a man who had a family to raise. Okay. The State Department didn't allow married women to work in certain posts, and they certainly didn't allow a woman, who had a child out of wedlock. She couldn't keep me and her job, basically. So that forced the decision to some extent. And from what I can gather from talking to her in the situation, it was an agonizing decision. I mean, right up to the moment of me hopping on that plane, she wasn't sure that it was what she wanted to do.
You were raised by blue-collar parents. You went on the West Coast. You went to college, probably unusual in your family at the time, at Fordham University in New York City. How did you accomplish all that?
Yeah, I was basically the cliche, first in my family to go to college. My father was a ramp serviceman, a baggage handler for United Airlines. My mother basically raised me and my two brothers, who were not adopted, by the way. My father had big ambitions for me, and that was the other thing that sort of drove my childhood. And I think in retrospect, it's weird, he felt a responsibility. Like, he really liked his younger sister. He's taken on this responsibility. He's got to do something with it. So he pushed me, to do more than I might otherwise would have. He expected big things of me. And I was like, I don't know, mediocre. It's like, I was an okay athlete. I was, I had like a 3.2 in high school. I was okay, but it wasn't like I was the guy who was like, oh, that guy's going to be a star, whatever. It's like, but I had that feeling I got to do something. And I felt like I had to challenge myself, which is what led me to go to Fordham University in New York. It's complicated. I had a friend who was from New York whose family moved to SeaTac when we were in high school, and we became friends. And he went to Fordham, and I followed him there.
Got a Jesuit education. How did that influence you?
Quite a bit, actually. I'm a very philosophical person. I wasn't raised religious. That was one of the agreements with the adoption, was I was supposed to be raised Episcopalian. I was baptized, never quite worked out, but I was always very interested in those subjects, in philosophy, meaning of life, theology, and let me tell you, the Jesuits are a great group of people to hang out with if you want to think about that stuff and study it. So it was a really good education.
I wrote a sentence down from this period of your life. You wrote, "Fear and insecurity were near constant companions as a child and didn't mix well with my very large ambitions." So tell me what you were telling us about that experience.
Yeah, no, and I know everybody when they're young, not everybody, but I guess most people feel a degree of insecurity. It's part of growing up. You don't know exactly who you are. You don't know who you want to be. Mine was at a slightly higher level. I was afraid of a lot of things, particularly new experiences, interacting with people. I was afraid of heights. I was afraid of being on the water. I was, really afraid of interacting with people that I didn't know. At the same time, I was a pretty ambitious, competitive person. Sports were a great outlet for that, until I screwed up my knee and my arm and a bunch of other things. And by the time I was 13 or 14, I really couldn't play that effectively. But sports just gave me a place to go and just, have some focus. But yeah, I was very insecure and very ambitious at the same time. And, I mentioned the trip to Fordham and the education. The biggest thing about Fordham was just, I'm going to New York. I'm petrified. Okay, what am I going to do? How am I going to make this work? And my father died my first year at Fordham and was trying to figure that out. It was a very difficult, challenging experience that I think the main thing I got out of it was to learn how to deal with difficult, challenging experiences. I had to push myself forward past that fear and insecurity and lack of confidence more than anything.
Did that lesson come in to play later on in your life when you were dealing with these problems?
Yes and no. That lesson primarily came into play as I was pursuing what I wanted out of life. It drove me to be willing to, this is hard, this is difficult, but I'm just going to do it. The problem when the anxiety and the pain hit is, as I document, I had no idea what to do. I mean, for the most part, when I was trying to accomplish something in life, and I felt like, I can't do it, I would oh God, I was very self-pitying. I would be, yeah. But then I'd be like, okay, what are you going to do? All right, you can sit around here and wallow all day, you can go to work. So I had my little lists, my little yellow notepads. So I was writing down, what am I going to do? What am I going to do? Or, when I was running for the state Senate, I could doorbell. I could walk out the door and I could go knock on doors. I could do something. Here, what can I do? I have this feeling of unbelievable anxiety. I can't sleep. I can barely eat. It can't go away. I'm in pain. I'm trying to exercise, but I can't. I was lost, basically. So I would say no, actually. Well, I guess in one sense, I never gave up. Okay, that's why I went to over 100 different people. I'm not going to stop until either I just physically can't move forward or until I find the answer. So in that sense, it was helpful.
Your first campaign was at age 25 and for the state Senate. So when I was reading it, I kept thinking, why, with this crippling anxiety you experienced even as a young person, would you choose such a public career?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. I think in large part, I didn't think it through in that level of detail. Okay. I just thought.
Why were you drawn to politics?
Because of my father. I mean, that's the initial draw. He was the secretary treasurer of his union. He was never that involved, but he was interested in politics and subjects, and that's what he sort of wanted to push me into. And then as I got into it, I had this sense that despite all of that insecurity, that I had leadership qualities, that I liked to solve problems and bring people together to try to find out how to resolve differences. I liked doing that. I liked sort of bringing peace and order to the immediate world around me. So I thought it was something that I could do. And also, as I document in the book, I thought it was my destiny. I just did, okay? Whatever forces in the universe there are, I thought this was what I was supposed to do. And then I was like, this is what I'm supposed to do, but so I forced myself forward. In fact, I document in the book, I was terrified of the water, so I wasn't going to swim, but they were taking us to swimming lessons in the 4th grade, and I refused to even try until like halfway through the class one day. I just jumped in the water. I said, well, at some point I'm going to have to do this, so let's just give it a shot.
Just like your political campaign, just jumped in.
Yeah. So jump in and keep paddling, basically.
The story of your life so far seems to be stretches of really good times, and then bouts of anxiety and pain. And you write that after your Senate, by the way, you were the youngest state senator in the United States when you got elected?
At the time.
At the time, yes.
They dug up that stat when I was elected.
So you had a good 15-year run. So what was working?
Confidence was the big thing, because I did not have confidence prior. I had the sense of ambition, but I also thought, I'm not going to be able to get there. I had a lack of confidence. But when I won that election, I had confidence. And then I found out I was actually pretty good at it. If I wasn't all the time, if I could just think and interact with people, that I, sort of knew how to do this. And I was fortunate as well. I got to chair the Judiciary Committee 2 years after I was elected to the state Senate. Seat in Congress was available. It was a tough campaign against an incumbent Republican, but I got there. It turned out, with a little bit of confidence, I was pretty good at it. Now, during that time frame, as I document, it was a high stress thing. I mean, my general approach to getting through these difficult challenges was, as I document it, think, work, worry. That's what I did. And it's over. Finally relax. Okay. That will wear you down after a certain amount of point if you're that intense and that stressed. And meanwhile, my knee and my back and a bunch of other things were not working great at the time either. But I got through it. Haven't
even gotten to the congressional seat yet, but because as I was trying to put your timeline together, you did have two incidents, notable incidents during that 15-year run. One was right after your victory. You write about a severe bout of depression, and then in 1994, more or less a little breakdown in the state Senate Democratic caucus. Did either of those raise warning flags for you?
No. They should have, but they didn't. So I won that election, and like I said, I was very confident. Now, my mother passed, my adoptive mother, the only mother, my mother is the way I think of it, passed away, literally the night before I got elected to the state Senate. And my father passed away, so I'm home alone, living in the house that I grew up in. But I was in the Senate. Life was good in a whole wide variety of ways. But then just this incredible, it was depression. It was like nothing interested me. I just had this black feeling for 3 or 4 months that I told nobody about. A story I don't put in the book, actually, a colleague of mine who I had interned for when I was in law school called me one day. He was a state house member. I was in the Senate. He called me and said, "Adam, are you okay?" And I was like, I'm fine. He said, well, I walked past you today and you just look terrible. And it didn't even occur to me, that, I was walking around looking like, So, but it went away, and I didn't really give it much thought. 90. And whenever I felt the 1994 story is when I, failed to pass a bill that I was supposed to pass. Long, complicated story, and I broke down in tears trying to explain it to the caucuses. But that feeling of failure just broke me for the moment.
You also got married during this time. You referenced your wife works at the King County and had 2 kids.
Yes.
What are your kids are young adults now? What are they doing today?
They're here, actually. My daughter is 22, and she's working for Marie Gluesenkamp-Perez. She's the staff assistant, entry-level position in her office. She just graduated from college last June, and my son just started an internship out here. He's a sophomore at Washington State. Well, I guess they would say a rising junior at this point. Along
this long road that you traveled, how aware was your family of what you were struggling with?
My wife was very aware of it. My children, a little bit here and there, probably more than I'm aware of. But but I kept going. I did what I could do. I didn't lock myself in the bedroom and stay there for a day occasionally. But they were very aware of it. I mean, you're living in the same house, there's no avoiding it.
So in 1996, despite the fact that you just described it to me, you were in a very, very stressful position already, and responding to that stress by intensity of work, you decided to run for Congress.
Yeah, for lack of a better way to put it, I loved politics, I loved being involved, but state senate was a part-time job. I was working as a part-time prosecutor, and I was looking for a full-time job in politics. I'll be perfectly honest about it. And the Republican Revolution was in 1994. Actually, the state of Washington got hammered with that. We had 8 Democrats out of the 9 seats in 94. We lost 6 of them. So it was 7-2 Republican. We lost 6 seats in the state. So I ran for one of those. Which is good. But yeah, it was a very stressful experience. I don't think I tell the story in the book, but so I'm trying to make sure I don't have a primary, a bunch of different things. And then there was actually Judith Billings was a woman she was the superintendent of public instruction, and I'd worked with her, good person and everything. And I start hearing this rumor that she's got AIDS and she's going to run for the 9th district seat. I'm like, ugh. But turned out true. She did have AIDS, a transfusion issue, I think. I forget what it was, and she's still doing well, which is great. But I went through this period when she became this huge national story, and everybody thought she was going to run. And in the middle of all this, the DCCC asked me to come back to DC to do a candidate thing, which I didn't want to do because my district. All right, I ain't getting any votes in DC, okay? I'm knocking on doors, I'm staying in the district, but I did it. And then the plane's delayed, and I'm stuck in Detroit in January or something trying to connect. And there's Judith Billings on the national news. And I'm like, are you kidding me? And I literally, I put my head down on the counter, and the exact thing I said is, why did I do this to myself? I didn't have to do this. I could have done something a lot more peaceful, a lot more stressful, and I probably spent an hour like that, and then I got out my notepad and said, okay, what are we going to do?
And you won.
Yeah. She didn't run, which helped. So yes. And so it wound up being just a one-on-one with the Republican. But yeah, the stress was always there. That's what I'm trying to convey. It's not like, I stressed my way through all of that.
So when you got to Washington, other than Alaska and Hawaii, you have probably the longest commute of any member of Congress, and you made the decision for your family to stay back in Washington, is that right?
Correct, yes.
In retrospect?
We made the decision. My wife and I made the decision, yeah.
In retrospect, was that the right one?
Absolutely.
I mean, jumping on airplanes every week to get back?
Have no doubt. The Pacific Northwest is a great place to live. My wife is very close to her family. They live in Portland, Oregon. So we spend a lot of time down there. I'm glad that my children were raised in the district. And truthfully, I don't really mind airline travel that much. It gives me a time to relax, think, read, organize. Now when I was going through the pain and the anxiety, that was an entirely different story. But yes, it was the right decision.
So you got to tell me about your lifestyle, because we hear about members of Congress who do as you did, which is don't rent a place in Washington yes. because the 2 homes are very expensive to keep up. You lived in your office.
Yes, not when we first moved out, but when our second child was born in 2003, and it just didn't make sense to go back and forth and try to maintain a place. So yeah, I've probably been staying in my office for 18 years now.
How does that work?
Oh, not bad. You know, I'm a minimalist for the most part. So
you have a pull-out mattress in your office?
Yeah, well, it's evolved. I slept on the couch for a lot of years. I used an aero bed for a while, but those things tend to spring little leaks in them if you overuse them. So I'd wake up in the middle of the night sometimes. It's like, so I don't want to do that. So I slept on the couch for a while, and then when my hips started going bad, I felt like I needed something a little better. So I've got a bed, actually a box frame, that I slide into the closet and slide out of the closet. So
I have this vision of this darkened congressional office building with a few members here and there in the middle of the night. Is that essentially what it's like? So where do you cook? Where do you use the restroom?
Well, I've got a restroom in the office. I pay for the members' gym, so shower down there.
And what about meals?
We got a fridge and microwave, so I buy stuff for breakfast, but otherwise lunch and dinner I eat out.
Is there a little community of members who sleep in their offices that support one another?
Oh, absolutely. Prior to the pandemic, it was actually a lot. In fact, Paul Ryan and Kevin McCarthy, I don't know if Kevin McCarthy still sleeps in his office. He's the speaker. He's got a nicer office. It'd be a better gig. But there was a lot. Now, they shut the gym down during the pandemic. So a lot of members found alternatives. I stuck it out in a variety of different ways. So I think it's a smaller number now, but it's not insignificant.
So you were in the minority when you arrived and remained in the minority for 2008, I thought it was
10 years.
10 years. What was that experience like for you as a member?
Well, actually, if you're going to come in as a freshman, coming in the minority is not the worst situation because it's a high pressure situation. You're trying to figure out, okay, how do I make all of this work? Everything you described. How do you make it work for your family? And if you're in the majority, there's a lot more pressure. Now, after 10 years, you start to think, okay, is this ever going to change? But look, a lot of the job of Congress doesn't have anything to do with whether or not you're in the majority or the minority. You're serving your constituents. You're responding to emails, you're dealing with Social Security, Medicare, tax problems, you're talking about issues and introducing bills. So it's not terrible being in the minority, in my view, because a lot of what I do is about the constituents. How are we representing them? How am I listening to them and responding to them on a consistent basis? But it's different.
Well, I hope I remember this correctly, but I think you wrote that it was a much more congenial place until about 2008.
Yeah.
What happened?
That's a good question. I think, well, from 96 to, keep in mind, in 96, when I got elected, the end of history, right? We won the Cold War, kicked ass in the first Gulf War, everything was going to be fine, the budget was balanced.
There was discussion about a surplus in the budget and how
there
to spend
was a
it.
surplus for 4 years. And the Republicans were in charge of the House, and they didn't like to be in session that much. We used to have a Tuesday through Thursday schedule. When the Republicans were in the majority in the early 2000s. We'd fly out Tuesday morning, have votes after 6:30, Wednesday, Thursday we were done by 2 and flying back. It wasn't necessarily, it was a calmer time, but then you'd have to write a whole nother book to describe what happened, okay? But I think more people became involved in politics. It became democratized. You can go on the internet, you can go on social media. A lot more people got involved, a lot more people got intense about it. The Tea Party emerged after, Barack Obama was elected president. We're engaged in 2 wars. The Great Recession hit in 2009. I remember standing on the floor when that first bailout bill went down, and everybody's on their phone watching the stock market go. Unfortunate analogy given what's coming up next week, but and then it just got a lot more intense and back and forth, and you're on social media all the time, and you're on cable all the time. It is a lot more of a 24/7 job than it was prior to 2008.
And it got more expensive to run? More fundraising?
Yeah, it depends on what race you're in. My district's kind of okay, so I haven't been in one of those, intense, $10 million races. But yeah, if you're in a competitive seat, you got to raise money constantly.
2005, the troubles begin. First time you went to a psychiatrist in March of 2005. What was happening?
Just anxiety overwhelmed me. As I describe in the book, my life was very stressful at that point. My children were 4 and 1. I I was on that Tuesday, Thursday schedule, small children, and I don't know, I came home one night and this overwhelming sense of anxiety just hit me. It wouldn't go away. Among other things, I was terrified of the inevitability of my own death at that point. That seemed to hit me. But then I was just, I had never felt anything like that in my life. It was just this unbelievable anxiety. Every second of every day was like an existential threat. The only way I can describe it is imagine that, you're basically facing what you think is your own death, like someone's coming at you with a machete or your car is skidding towards a cliff. That's the way I felt every second of every day.
Did you get relief at that point?
The only way I got relief was when I called up the psychiatrist, because I was home, and the psychiatrist was out here. That my doctor at the Capitol connected me to a psychiatrist out at Bethesda, which is now Walter Reed. It was Bethesda Medical Center back then. And he prescribed a benzodiazepine for me.
And what is that?
Clonazepam. It's Xanax, Valium. And I took one of those pills and it relaxed me perfectly.
But then you're worried about getting addicted to the pills?
The whole thing and the drugs throughout this whole process, and there's half dozen different drugs or maybe more that I took throughout the whole thing. Some of them helped, some of them didn't. But even the ones that helped, I was constantly worried about the fact that what are the side effects, and I'm going to build up tolerance. And I absolutely built up tolerance to clonazepam. That was the benzodiazepine that I used. And it didn't work as well after that. But the first time, never having taken it before, it was a miracle. But even while I'm doing it, I'm like, I can't rely on this. So I take one, go a couple days. I went and saw the psychiatrist. I document that in the book. It's hard to explain. I don't know what exactly he was trying to accomplish, but I didn't understand what he was talking about or what was going on. But 4 or 5 months after that, I just stopped taking the clonazepam, and eventually I calmed down and got better.
And it was going into an election year on top of it all.
Yeah, well, there were election years and then there were election years. In 2006, I had won. It's a long story to explain, but at that point, nobody was coming after me of any significance, which is, again, weird. My seat was kind of a 50-50 seat, but I'd been winning it consistently for so long that nobody really challenged me. So fortunately, I didn't have a very difficult election. After
2006, another good 6-year run. Democrats are now in the majority, right?
Yeah.
So during this period, you were thriving, you said. You thought you had life, in hand.
No, and I even calmed down a little bit. My children were older, so they were more manageable. I'm not great with babies. I document that in the book. No experience, what's going on there. But, once they got to the point where they could communicate, things got better. And it was fun. I was chairman of a subcommittee, got to do that. And then in 2010 was a very difficult year to be a Democrat. And I was stressed, but it was different. I'd figured out a way. I didn't do it from that worry standpoint. I was more upbeat and cheerful about it. And I thought I had figured some things out, yes.
Except 2013 hit.
Yeah.
And this is a very telling moment. You were on a flight back to D.C. and all of a sudden the wave came again.
Yeah. I'd had a couple of bad nights in the week before, but I could feel it when I was on the flight. Just once again, the existential fear came back. It was kind of in and out. And basically, when I'm feeling it, I can't focus on anything. I mean, a little slip here, but it's all just that sort of feeling of existential fear.
Here's some words from the book. I couldn't watch TV or read a book. I stressed out about everything I saw or read. My God, my family, I shuddered every time I thought about trying to tell them what was going on with me. I barely slept and my mind raced.
Yeah, that's a pretty good description.
So how did you approach this? With the guy who makes lists and puts things together, what was your next step?
The basic step there was to assume that it was similar to 2005. I would, just talk to a therapist. I got some clonazepam, helped me get through it, and eventually, but it didn't, I got to the point where I was taking more clonazepam and it wasn't working as well. So basically I was just lost. And then I went in search of therapists, and I found a whole bunch of them, and went through a bunch of stuff.
During that time, you took a CODEL, which is a congressional delegation trip to Afghanistan with armed services. What was that trip like for you?
It was hell. I mean, I flew. I had to fly to, I guess, Austrian Airlines for some reason was how I got the initial stage of the trip to Frankfurt, and then I met up with a bunch of people there. I didn't sleep the whole trip because I was I'm just sitting. I couldn't do anything. I just sat on this plane, basically. Couldn't read a book, couldn't do stuff, and then when I got there, it was like just, and I was not taking any medication at that time. I was just toughing it out, and it was really difficult.
Did you have anyone that was aware of this, another member of Congress or a staff member that could be somewhat of a support with you?
Yeah, the only person, my staff director was along on the trip, Paul Arcangeli, who was with me for about 10 years and 12 years as the staff director for the Democrats on Armed Services. And yeah, I talked to Paul about it.
So you had someone you could go to and just say, I'm going through this again.
Now, kind of freaking out over here, yes. Right.
In 2014, then another whole layer, that's when the physical pain went on. And as you said at the beginning, you went through 3 hip replacements in a really short period of time.
3 hip surgeries. Yeah. There was the controversy on the first surgery is, did I need a replacement, or could I just sort of, it's what do they call it? FAI surgery, where they go in and they shave down bone and they do other things to reshape your hip. So I did one of those, and then I did 2 replacements. But and fundamentally at that point, I didn't understand what was going on with my body. Yes, my hips were slightly impinged and in pain, but my whole body was twisted around because, skipping to the end of the story on the physical side, that knee problem I had when I was a kid, I had surgery when I was 16, and I didn't rehab it. So this side of my body got a lot stronger than that side because I favored it. If it hurt, I just didn't, I did it. And it twisted my whole body out of position and caused all of my muscles to shut down. And whether or not I needed those hip surgeries is something I will never know. I think if I had found the muscle activation therapist who I eventually found, healthcare provider number 106, if you will, I think I probably could have fixed the problem and not needed those surgeries, but I didn't know that at the time. So I was just struggling, and my hips did have problems. Undeniably, there was, bone spurs there. I had a slight tear, and it's funny, I got to go back and memorize all the terms now that are getting out of my head, but there's some muscle in your hip that I had a slight tear in, but was that the source of the pain? The answer, no, it wasn't actually. It was a symptom.
You start the book, the first chapter is really about the year 2016 with the chapter heading Rock Bottom. What I wanted to do was we found a bit of video from you in 2016 at work in the Armed Services Committee. Let's show people what the outside world was seeing at that point.
Sure.
The threat environment is complex, and the largest problem that our committee faces is we do not have the money. We had good debates, disagreed, and we voted, and we passed, or are about to pass, a very significant piece of legislation.
Now, 2 reasons I wanted to follow. One of the things, you changed chairs during that hearing. Yeah. What was going on there?
During this whole pain, finding a chair that I could sit in, my staff could tell jokes days long, because my back and my hips were so bad that first of all, I couldn't, if the chair was like going back and forth like this, my muscles they wouldn't handle it. So I had to have something that was like this chair, which is solid, straightforward. But it hurt so bad that I needed it to be cushioned if possible. So that was the chair I forgot how ridiculous that chair looked. Because it was cushioned, it was soft, and I could sit in it, and it was comfortable and go back. It was the most comfortable chair I could find to sit in. And also what you don't see in that video is, so the bed I mentioned that was in my office, my staff actually brought the bed down to this small anteroom that's just off the chamber. So, because that markup lasted from 10 a.m. one day to 4:30 a.m. the next day. So I could take a break and I could go lie down in the bed that was just outside of the Armed Services Committee room. So, yeah, and I wasn't looking too good in that picture as I look at it. So,
well, actually, no one would have known anything was going on in looking at that picture. And the difference between what you were experiencing and how you projected in a very public job to the public, how did you pull that off?
Well, fortunately, and as I say in the conclusion of the book, you always got some things going for you and you got some things going against you. The crippling pain and the crippling anxiety were going against me, but I don't know, I've always been reasonably articulate. I can think and I can talk, even in those moments. So, I was able to keep communicating in a reasonably clear way despite everything that was going on with me. That helped. The other thing that helps, I had a ton of support, from my friends, from my family, from my staff. But yeah, no, it was difficult. I just went moment to moment.
Yeah, and here's some more words from most of this period: a blur. Help from my staff and my wife, productive enough. The hardest part was deciding what to do day in and day out. Wondered how long people would be willing to keep helping me, and I needed so much help. I really hated the whole situation. Is there a point at which you thought, I should take a leave of absence? I'm not serving my constituents as well as I should?
Well, we don't have a leave of absence. Okay, so that's not really an option. It's not like I can have someone do the job for me. Look, I do think about that. And I guess my thoughts go through this. First of all, my team and I, we were still, I think, serving the constituents well. I wasn't doing as much, no question, but I was involved, engaged, doing issues. I didn't just completely check out during the surgeries, for this couple of weeks afterwards. Second of all, and I've had a lot of employees through the years that have gone through a bunch of different things. And I think part of what we need to do on both the mental health, you need to help people, okay? Because if people are going to seek help for mental health or physical pain problems, they can't be thinking, if I tell somebody, I'm going to get fired. Okay, so I go out of my way, and I did even before all of this. If somebody's going through something, we're going to cover you for a while. You're not going to do as much, we'll do a little bit more. And I think that's the spirit that we need to try to help people with all of this. So I think it balanced out. Now, by the time we got to 2016, and that was the moment after my third surgery, that was the longest stretch when I really, the surgery was in February. As I document in the book, it's April, and I'm not getting any better. And that was the moment when, but I went back to work and I said, we're going to find our way through this.
Was leadership aware that you were struggling?
Good question. I don't know. I don't think well, obviously they knew that I was gone when I had that surgery, but as long as I was there voting, some were, some weren't. Just depends on what was going on in their lives more than anything. So
this is 2016. Fast forward to April of 2019, which is when you got relief. What was that 3-year period like? What were you going through in this most intense combination of anxiety and physical pain?
Well, it was really just, it was a quest, if you will, to find a solution. And that's what I sort of determined in 2016 is I'm not giving up. One way or the other, I'll go to whatever, I'm going to find the answer to this. And so basically that was the period when I saw physical therapists, massage therapists, chronic pain people, all those people I mentioned earlier, desperately trying to find what's going on here. What's the diagnosis? What's the treatment? And eventually I found it. In fact, I had found by 2016 the therapist, I just didn't know it yet, who would help me on these.
Mental or physical therapist?
Psychologist, who was covered by insurance. One of the few that was. And he really helped me. He had an approach to the mental health issue that I rejected at first, but was right. And 3.5 years of psychotherapy later, I figured out, sort of why I was feeling that way and how to look at things differently.
Your book is dedicated to him, is that right? And also to the physical therapist. Yeah. There's a particular kind of therapy you found called MAT. What is that?
They call it's muscle activation techniques. Now, muscle activation therapy is a whole bunch of different people do that in different ways. It's the basic idea that your muscles need to be activated, okay, which is massage mostly. They've come up with a way to do it with an electric pulse now with the muscle activation techniques people. But the muscle activation techniques people got into really elaborate detail on it. And they identified that there are 43 distinct muscle patterns in your body. Basically, the movements that your body does in a bunch of different ways, every single one of those movements is controlled by one of those 43 patterns. And those patterns are either turned on or turned off. And if they're turned off, that's going to put you in a difficult position. Now, If you've got 1 or 2 patterns turned off out of 43, you're probably fine. But in my case, they were pretty much all turned off at that point. And then they go through the process of restarting them, of testing them to see which ones are shut down. And then back then, they do manual massage to get them started. And in the years since, they've discovered this electric pulse that will turn them back on. And it's remarkable. I mean, when they do the test, if the muscle's turned off, you can't resist even the smallest little push. Turn them back on, and it stops. And then they build up the resilience. And that's what it took me. I saw him in April of 2018. Probably took me about a year, 8-9 months before I started to really get significantly better, and then about a year to get back to what I would call normal. But that attention to detail that was not there with all the physical therapists I saw and the chiropractors that really didn't know how the body worked and weren't fixing it. So those 2 people, the psychologist and the muscle activation techniques guy, were the ones who finally figured out how to diagnose and treat me.
Do you still continue with both today?
Not with the psychologist, but with the muscle activation person every couple of months, because, things shut down. My body is still kind of, my right side, it's getting better, but it's not as strong as the left. My pelvis still shifts. I got, different things. I go in every couple of months and, get sort of tuned back up. But I'm able to exercise, do everything I want. I'm sitting here and I'm not thinking about, is this chair the right chair?
For almost an hour. Impressive.
Can I sit here? So, but I think that, and I don't know how much time we have left, but the psychological part is really important, because I think understanding mental health, and I talk about this, and the stigma has been a big problem, and we're getting better on that. The last 3 or 4 years in particular, a lot of people have talked publicly about mental health issues, and there's been an awakening that, no, we need to have this conversation. Now we also need to talk about, what do you do about it? Okay? And there are some basics to mental health that I don't think are communicated as clearly to people, and that's what this guy communicated to me. I mean, basically, it's the opening line when I sat down with him, and I filled out this survey, like 135 questions or some damn thing. And the first thing he said to me was, "You don't think you have a right to exist," which I thought was insane. Okay, it's like, I'm confident, I know who I am, but the point is, you have to have a basic sense of your own self-worth, and a lot of people don't. It's called a healthy narcissism in psychiatrists. The basic idea that regardless of how good you are at anything, you just have a fundamental worth as a human being. And that's where it all starts. And that's what I didn't have. And I don't know if it's because I was adopted and because, I document in the book there were other challenges with my adoptive parents and the family I grew up in. But for some reason, I felt like I had to prove myself every day that I didn't have a basic worth, which is why the prospect of failure, of not doing something successfully, was such a huge threat to me. Because if I didn't succeed, if I wasn't everything, that I felt like I had to be, then I didn't have any worth. And that's what I argued with my psychologist about. I said, well, look, he said, well, where do you think you get your self-worth? And I said, well, I'm good at my job. He said, so you think that's where your value comes from how good you're at work? And I'm like, well, no, I'm a good father, I'm a good husband. So you think your self-worth comes from your deeds? And I was like, well, duh, what else you got? No, and the basic thing is, and this is sort of weird, I don't know, new agey, whatever, it's because you're alive. No matter who you are as a human being, you have a fundamental self-worth which can never be challenged regardless of what you do. And that's not to say that it doesn't matter what you do, but if you don't have that sense of self-worth, day in and day out is an existential struggle. And if that was always creeping down inside me. And then you also have to be honest about what's going on in your life, what happened in your childhood. You can't bury this stuff. That's actually a psychologist years before this was trying, when I was first starting to struggle, was trying to explain the concept of suppression. That there's stuff in your life that you've suppressed. And I remember thinking, well, I'm 48 years old. I've suppressed it for this long. Couldn't I just do it for another 30, 35 years and call it good? No, you really can't. If there's things that were stressful about your childhood, about your life right now, it is helpful to be honest with them. It doesn't necessarily have to be with a trained therapist, but certainly you have to have people around you who enable you to be honest with yourself, okay? What are you really feeling? Because that anger, that anxiety that you're feeling, you think it's because that car cut you off on the road. It's probably got a little bit more to do with relationships or things that are more fundamental that you haven't addressed. So those two things, a healthy narcissism and honesty about who you are and what's going on in your life, crucial steps to starting to deal with anxiety and depression.
What was it like getting off drugs?
Oh, it was tough. It was really tough. But then, it was liberating. I just always knew that wasn't the answer. Deep down, it was just a crutch. And certainly because I took tramadol and oxycodone, for the pain for a long time. And then the clonazepam was the big one, but I tried a SSRI. I tried Celexa, but Prozac, Zoloft is what that is. It's supposed to even you out. Not helpful, but by and large, and I don't want to overstate this case. I don't want to get in trouble. There are undoubtedly some people in this country who need to be on medication, but we way overprescribe the stuff. And in most cases, it blocks our ability to deal with the mental issues that we are facing.
I had another clip. We have about 8 minutes left in our conversation. I had another clip that I wanted to play, because throughout the book, you make reference to a pretty old movie, 1987, The Princess Bride. And there's a particular scene about assets and liabilities that seem to speak to you. Let's just remind people who may have seen it a long time ago.
There doesn't leave much time for dilly-dallying.
You just wiggle your finger. That's wonderful.
I've always been a quick healer. What are our liabilities?
There is but one work in Castlegate. Come on. And it is guarded by 60 men.
And our assets?
Your brains. Fez's strength. I steal.
That's it? Impossible. If I had a month to plan, maybe I could come up with something like this.
You just shook your head. That doesn't make you happy?
My brains, his steel, and your strength against 60 men, and you think a little head jiggle is supposed to make me happy?
I mean, if we only had a wheelbarrow, that would be something.
Where do we put that wheelbarrow of the albino head?
Over the albino, I think.
Why didn't you list that among our assets in the first place?
Congressman Adam Smith, why does that movie, and particularly that scene, resonate with you?
Well, it's something I came up with during the course of the campaign. I mean, my first campaign in particular was an incredible long shot. I mean, there was no way no way anyone thought I was going to win that. And working through it, I finally came up with a way of looking at things. Anything you're trying in life, and this is an oversimplification, but you got 3 things going for you and 3 things going against you. And your job is to maximize the former and minimize the latter. Stressing obsessively about what those things are, it ain't going to help you much. Is what it is. Deal with it. Find a way through it. You can overcome many, many problems if you think more in terms of your assets and where you're going and what you're trying to accomplish. And and that, I think if you have that positive attitude towards it, it helps. That movie spoke to me. I mean, the main analogy that I use out of that movie is the whole "he's not dead, he's mostly dead" thing. Because early I have a sense of humor, which is what sort of really helped me get through all of this. But I took to referring to my experience in 2016 as Weekend at Bernie's. That basically my staff was hauling around the dead guy, trying to act like I was alive. But as I point out in the book, as I thought about it, that's not a great analogy because, Bernie, he's dead. And there isn't any coming back from that. So I came up with he's not dead, he's mostly dead. Because he comes back. You got to have hope. You got to have a positive outlook, even in very difficult times.
So in the 5 minutes we have left, your book begins with an executive summary of what you learned throughout this. It's only 25 years, really, the whole process from the beginning. So we talked about some of them. Must eliminate the stigma around mental illness. Psychotherapy works. Don't underestimate the impact of mental health issues on the level of conflict and instability in our society. You want to say more about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, we are sort of focused on this now. I mentioned how Congress has gotten more difficult in 2008, but I think just in general, people are more prone to conflict and they're more prone to being angry about situations that come up in life. And I can tell you from firsthand experience, if you're experiencing anxiety or depression, you are more likely to get upset about just the common little interactions, the person who takes too long in the grocery store line, or like I said, the person who cuts you off in the car, or who maybe, I think that really ramps up the conflict because we have so many unresolved mental health issues and chronic pain. When you're in pain, it's a lot more difficult to not be, engaged in conflict.
A couple more. Can't rely on doctors or other healthcare providers to solve your problem. The complexity of the body and mind makes diagnosis and treatment difficult.
Yeah.
Here's two last, and then because we have a few minutes left. Healthcare system is not well designed for complex problem solving. You spoke about that at the outside. It's all compartmentalized with specialists along the way. But here's your last. Don't give up on science, logic, and reason. Persist.
Yeah, no, and that's ultimately my optimism, and I worry as people dive into this. This is why people fall towards more cult-like ideologies. Science, logic, and reason are very frustrating. Gosh, I know that. I mean, I applied it forever to no particular, positive end until I finally got there. And so there's a tendency to fall back on magical thinking or on, well, there must be just some other solution. I don't want to have to think that hard. But it does, in fact, work. You can find solutions to the problems you face. Because and I don't mention this explicitly in there as I think about it, in the modern world, you have access to a limitless amount of information, which can be a problem because you can get sort of paralysis by analysis. But it also means that you have resources to find either the answers or people who can help you find the answers. So it's really important that people, keep trying. To find what can better treat and deal with whatever challenges they face.
Well, two last questions. One of those is, some people listening to this will say, I'm not a member of Congress. I don't have access to the infrastructure. I can't pick up a phone and say, I'm a member of Congress and I need an early appointment. Yeah. Where are the commonalities in your experience with the rest of the public?
Well, to begin with, that access is a double-edged sword. Okay, I got in trouble a lot of times because I went to too many people. Okay, you don't necessarily need access to everybody. You need access to the right people. So I don't know necessarily that the fact that I had that access was so helpful. A lot of people wanted to help me, but it sent me down a lot of blind alleys. So even to my point, again, even with limited assets, if you use them correctly, many times that can be more helpful than if you've got all these assets that have you chasing after your tail in a bunch of different directions. So it's a mixed bag. I remember, that first campaign, I didn't have a ton of assets. I was a blue-collar kid, living at home with his mother. But I used the little ones I had correctly.
And last, we're talking to you even before your pub date, just a couple days away from the official pub date, which means that over the next few weeks, months, you're going to be talking a lot about the journey that you were on and your mental and physical health challenges and how you overcame them. What would be the best thing that would come out of this whole process for you?
Best thing would be if, the country as a whole and individuals got a better understanding of how to deal with anxiety, depression, and chronic pain. If people didn't have to go to 100 different healthcare providers to find an answer, they'd have a better understanding. Muscle activation is key, and if I'm feeling chronic pain, I should start there, and then maybe see if surgeries are necessary. And on mental health, healthy narcissism, be honest with yourself, and the last one I haven't mentioned yet is you don't have to chase every emotion that comes into you. Okay, if you feeling anxious, you can let that go. You can train your mind to better deal with what you experience. So if people just knew how to get off that first step, okay, the steps after that can be more difficult, but I struggled just to know that first step. And if more people would know that first step that would help them, that would be the most positive thing for me.
The book is titled Lost and Broken, My Journey Back from Chronic Pain and Crippling Anxiety. Congressman Adam Smith, thanks for the hour-long conversation.
Well, you're generous with your time. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to C-SPAN's Q&A, and subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts so you'll never miss an episode. And while you're there, please take a minute to rate and review us. You can also send us an email about Q&A at podcasts@c-span.org. Send me your questions, your comments, or ideas. Your feedback is welcome.